Hello, and thank you for being with me again. This week I've been focusing on the 10th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel and the account of the Good Samaritan. It's a gospel that has an awful lot to teach us, and it talks about how we're not only called to be kind and to be caring of those like us, but we're called to be kind and to be caring about people who would supposedly be our enemies. And this is not always something that we find easy to do. And so it's important to have a look and say, well, how could one approach this situation in order to live out our Christianity in this way as well? Why I say it calls us to look at how to deal with what would be our enemies is that the Samaritans were looked at as being dreadful people, generally by the Jews, because not only were they pagans as far as the Jews were concerned, but they were mixed. We had some Jews who had become mixed with the pagans and were Samaritans, and so for them they were worse than people who were just always pagan. And there was this looking down on them, which Jesus showed a number of times in his life was not what he intended things to be like. So one could ask, well, how do you set about loving those who would harm you, loving those who people might see as your enemies? And I had an experience some years ago when I was in South Africa. I worked a number of years on what are known as the Cape Flats, where we were building centres, knowing that with the change of government, we would have a huge influx of people, which subsequently happened. And with some funds from Europe, we were able to build some churches and near them an eating place where people could come and get something to eat, as well as getting water from the church when they needed it and so on. And working in those areas for a white person was deemed to be very dangerous and was in many ways. And we unfortunately had the experience that happens often in missionary territories of losing a number of our priests and religious who worked in these areas. And as I say, I designed a couple of churches and was responsible for overseeing the building of them, monitoring the building of them. And this meant having to go obviously to the construction sites on a fairly regular basis. You had to ask yourself, given the conditions, what you were going to do, whether you were going to go ahead with such a service or not. Because, for example, one learned to watch the traffic, and if there was no traffic coming from the other direction, you turned around and went away because you knew there was trouble up ahead. The police used to put a helicopter hovering over if there was particular trouble and so on. And so it was a fairly dangerous place to be, not all the time, but especially sometimes when special events happened. And so I had the occasion of working also with clergy and religious who lived and worked among these people in those dangerous conditions. And bit by bit you learn how to deal with such a situation. And what I found for myself was that where things changed for me and where I was able to do that service willingly, despite the fact that I was seen as someone somewhat undesirable, came about when I started to look outside of myself. Because you see, it wasn't me personally that the people had hard feelings towards. It was white people in general. And what I had to realize was these people were not just acting out of pure malice. They were coming from a place where they were battling in life. Life was very hard for them. There were so many things that they were battling, not only poverty, but separation from their birthplace, because in those areas, none of those people were originally from that area of the Cape Flats. They came from sometimes very far away from the country into the city, and especially during the early stages of that time in South Africa, if they were found without a pass in the city, they were taken back to their homeland and then made their way back again to the city, and they were backwards and forwards. They had a very disjointed sort of a life, and obviously no family to support them. It was the men who were coming to the city to find work in order to send money home. And when you started to realize that this was actually what was behind the aggression, that it wasn't aimed at you personally, but they were acting out of real difficulties in their own lives, you could sympathize with them, and you could understand that, especially with what they were told and what they had always been taught to think, that as far as they were concerned, a lot of the problems came about because of the white people. And so that was what they were acting out of. And once you can understand why a person is behaving in a particular way, you can forgive them for their behavior much more easily. And you can actually do things that are for their good, despite their welcoming or not of you. And I think this is something that we can carry into our lives in everyday life for any of us, to look around us, and when you find people who are seemingly aggressive towards you, or when people don't treat you well and so on, to try and understand where they're coming from, what hurt there is in them behind their actions, and to have compassion for them, to realize that any hitting out, anything that may happen like that, is actually just a result of their frustration, their hurt, and their anger at their situation in life that very often can be very debilitating for people. And once you can understand that and you can sympathize with them, it is very easy to forgive them and to accept that they may feel like that about you. In my case, I felt they were mistaken about me, but in their eyes they weren't, and I could understand why they felt that way. And understanding them made it that much easier to carry on doing what we were doing. And so I thought I would offer this to you as something for you to think about in your life. When you feel that you have an enemy or a person who's against you, look at them, understand where they come from, and apply Christian love to them. And that's when you'll be able to do something good for them and really help them in life, which is what we're called to do. And may God bless you. Thank you.